Hello, I'm Ayo Akinwolere, and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. For today's podcast, we're joined by the Athletic's Phil Hay and one of our Arsenal writers, James McNicholas, as well. James, let's start with you. Looking at the team sheet before the match, no Saka, no Ødegaard, we already knew that. The last time that happened in the Premier League was the 2-0 opening day defeat at Brentford way back in August 2021. And I know we're looking at it in hindsight now, but do you think that could have been a factor in, I guess, a lackluster performance for Arsenal against Bournemouth?
Undoubtedly. I mean, that right-hand side has been so important to Arsenal's progress over the last few years, the development of Saka, the arrival of Martin Ødegaard. And Arsenal have actually been quite a lopsided team, you'd say, over the last couple of seasons because they've generated so much through that flank. And one of the big areas for improvement in this side was making them more evenly balanced. That was something Mikel Arteta looked to remedy in the transfer market, signing Calafiori, Marino for the left-hand side. So I think being without both those players inevitably going to impact Arsenal. When you look at the central midfield that Arteta picked on the day, Thomas Partey, Marino, Declan Rice, it's very physical, very dominant in duels, but does it have the creativity of an Ødegaard in there, the flair, the ability to unlock the defence? Certainly not. All that said, and one of the big things we're here to talk about today is the fact that this game was really decided by a couple of major errors from Arsenal players. Two bad back passes, one from Leandro Trossard and one from Ayo Akinwolere. And I suspect Mikel Arteta's feeling very frustrated with that this morning because it's not really something you can legislate for as a manager.
Yeah, for sure. On the note of Saka and Ødegaard, Phil, do you think Arsenal have become overly reliant on those two players? I mean, they are very, very good players for that in that respect. But, Arsenal have managed not to lose this season, but some of those performances haven't been that great.
Very good players and also extremely durable. It's quite an amazing stat that you're going back to August 2021 for the last time that neither of them started. I'm not sure that they're overly reliant on them any more than some of the other teams around them in the division are reliant on big players as well. I think looking over at Liverpool, there's a heavy weight on Mo Salah, and I think he's been a big reason why they're top of the league at the moment. And had you taken him out of their side last season, had he gone to Saudi, had he not been there this season, I think it would be a different Liverpool team. I think the form would be different, and I don't think they would be top of the league. And likewise at City, they wouldn't cope well without Erling Haaland, I don't think. And Chelsea, for all that they've progressed, and I do think there were good signs for Chelsea at Anfield yesterday, would not be the same team without Cole Palmer. He's massive influence for them. And that's the same with Saka and Ødegaard. James touched on something that I was going to talk about as well, which is that Arsenal's right side, when Saka is there, does seem to be so incredibly productive. And he's a key player for them, Saka. It's not only his kind of open play influence that's essential for them. And that's a really big strength of his. But his delivery from set pieces as well has been a really crucial part of Arsenal being so effective in those situations. And his ability to put, dead ball deliveries right on the money in the 6-yard box for people like Gabriel and others is a really, really big weapon. And I do feel, James again was touching on the sort of physicality of the lineup on Saturday. I think when you take Saka and Ødegaard out of that, you do lose a touch of finesse that Arsenal really need and makes them more of a threat. But in terms of being too reliant on them, I just think they are exceptionally good players, and good teams are reliant on exceptionally good players.
That's a fair point. James, Arsenal head into the Champions League this week, and also Liverpool, let's not forget, at the Emirates after that. Any word on Saka? I know Mikel Arteta did a press conference earlier today. Do we know if Bukayo Saka is going to be fit?
Well, yeah, my colleague Art de Roche was there at London Colney this morning speaking to Mikel Arteta about that. And the news is that both Martin Ødegaard and Bukayo Saka are making progress. Ødegaard, not enough progress to be in contention this week. But Saka is expected to train with the squad today, and they'll make an assessment of him after that. I have to be honest and say that if it means that he has to miss the Shakhtar game, but he's available for Liverpool, then I think that's what Arsenal should do. I think Arsenal have got themselves into a strong position in the Champions League with this new format. They've got themselves plenty of games in which to secure their qualification. I think that Liverpool game sounds absurd, really, in October to be saying it, but it's taking on a kind of season-defining quality. I think Arsenal will probably enter that match feeling that they need to win. And if they lose, the gap to the top two potentially in Liverpool and Man City really starts to open up, which is not a good thing, given how relentless both those teams can be. So it wouldn't surprise me if Saka is held back for the Shakhtar game with a view to starting on Sunday. As Phil says, he's so important to what Arsenal offer, both in play and from set-piece situations.
Even at this early stage, individual games are taking on so much significance. I mean, I can remember us on this podcast talking about Arsenal going to Tottenham and it being crucial because it was City after that, and the gap potentially opening up if Arsenal were to drop points. And then you had City away, which was a key game for them, and now Liverpool, which is undoubtedly hugely important. But I think it's symptomatic of how tight it's been at the top of the Premier League, that every little twist is making people twitch. And you saw it with City in the late winner against Wolves. It was kind of treated as an absolutely vital goal, even though we're not quite out of October yet. And the one thing I would say about Arsenal is that we're only 8 games in, but when the really key fixtures have come around, the big fixtures, Spurs and City so far, they've absolutely turned up. And I think Arteta will be confident of that again against Liverpool.
Yeah. Phil, let's talk about the red card. James alluded to it earlier on. Arsenal's third so far this season. William Saliba pulled back Ivan Nilsson. Referee Rob Jones reversed his original decision, which was a yellow card, and then gave him a red card for denial of a goal scoring opportunity after an on-pitch review. What were your thoughts on that one?
I thought it was the right call, but I would definitely accept that it falls into that massive grey area where you can argue the toss either way. There's not a lot of doubt that Evan Nielsen was going in behind him and was, to a certain degree clean through. Ben White was covering on the left, had a lot of ground to make up, although White is extremely quick. It certainly doesn't compare with, this is the kind of prime example of denying a goal scoring opportunity, Ryan Fraser on Jamie Vardy in the Southampton-Leicester game on Saturday, where Vardy was underneath the crossbar and had a tap in. Fraser pulled his shirt, led to a penalty and a red card. And, that would have been missed without VAR. I thought VAR actually had a pretty decent weekend between all of that and also the Kudos red card in the Tottenham-West Ham game. But that spoke for itself. That should have been seen in real time, and that was an easy decision to make once it went to review. The bone of contention, I think, with the Saliba dismissal was that to look at Tosin at Anfield the following afternoon, there was a lot of similarity between the two incidents. And even though it seemed at Anfield like Jota was probably going wider, even though there was another defender a little bit closer, it felt as if you could have applied the same attitude to both incidents. And I think the benefit of the doubt given to Tosin was probably pretty fortunate. That's not to say that Saliba should have had it down at Bournemouth. I think it was the right call to send him off. But it does feed into the big and broader discussion about consistency.
Okay, for sure. So Arsenal coped fairly well when they went down to 10 men against Brighton and also Manchester City, getting draws in both of those matches, but not for a third time against Bournemouth, unfortunately. Let's find out from Tifo analyst Jon Mackenzie where it went wrong this time around.
We've now got quite a lot of evidence for what Arteta wants to do when his team are down to 10 players this season, given that they've been around 150 minutes in that kind of 10v11 game state. And I'd say that the Bournemouth game is quite a bit of an outlier compared to the other two, because in the other two, Arteta moved pretty quickly to a back five system, although Brighton did score just before Ricardo Calafiori was subbed on, so you could maybe argue that he didn't move quickly enough. But against City, it was pretty clear that Arteta just wanted to block that game out. They had a 2-1 lead, so they brought Saka off immediately at half-time, just after the red card happened, and then they tried to sit on that lead. But against Bournemouth, I thought it was a little bit more aggressive. Arteta stuck with a back four until Arsenal were 2-0 down, and then they really threw the kitchen sink at the game. They went to a back three, and they went for it for the last 10 minutes. And I suppose it's important to remember that in these sorts of 10v11 game states, managers are still trying to balance the trade-offs between attack and defence, and by just going for a back four against Bournemouth, it was pretty clear that Arteta felt that his team could get a bit more attacking upside than maybe they did against the other two teams as well. And I think they'll probably consider themselves fairly unlucky to have come across 3 of those game states now and come out of the loser in each of those periods.
That was Jon Mackenzie on Arsenal's red card against Bournemouth. James, I just want to bring you in on this one because, I watched that match and, of course, the red card was a turning point. But Arsenal still, with that midfield for sure, didn't quite look at the races, even from at the start of the game. Was it the red card, or were just Arsenal just weren't ticking as they usually would?
I think they weren't quite at their best. I mean, Bournemouth, I think, are an awkward team to play against. Very physical, press very well from the front. I actually think, they deserve a lot of credit for this result. They were excellent on the day. Arsenal missing two of their best players in Saka and Odegaard, as discussed. I think the balance of midfield maybe wasn't quite right. Maybe too much physicality in there, not enough craft potentially. So I think there were signs, even early in the game, that this was going to be a difficult afternoon for Arsenal. I wonder if Mikel Arteta will reflect on the way he changed it after the sending off. He brought Jakub Kiwior to come on and play as kind of right-sided centre half. Took Raheem Sterling off in order to do that. Could he have maybe dropped Declan Rice in next to Gabriel, or potentially put Thomas Partey in at right back with Ben White moving into centre half? That might have afforded him an extra attacking player on the field to help keep up the threat. The big change here, of course, is when Arsenal had red cards against Brighton and Man City, the game state was one that sort of suited them. Here, the game still needed to be won, and I'm not sure Arsenal gave themselves enough latitude to really do that. So a lot to reflect on for Mikel Arteta, but his overriding feeling will be that we just can't keep doing this. There's no way that Arsenal going down to 10 men quite as frequently as this is going to be sustainable over the course of a season.
Yeah, and very quickly, Phil, credit to Ireola yet again proving that very astute coach and a well-drilled team.
Yeah, good coach, good team. But that really makes the point. And, Arteta, it seemed to me, spoke more afterwards about the mistakes rather than trying to argue the toss over the red card. And I guess it's easy to be under the misapprehension that because the teams at the top of the Premier League have been so strong, particularly over the last few years, that the world's apart from the rest of the league. But actually, there's some really savvy teams in there, some really tactically savvy coaches, of which Ireola is one. Brighton, another very good side, another side who've taken points off Arsenal when Arsenal have been down to 10 players. And I guess the reality is you cannot get away with that time and time again, and Arsenal haven't got away with it once. I actually thought, for what it's worth, that the performance in the adversity of having 10 players at Manchester City was really good, excellent. And they got picked off right at the end there, but it was a very, very good organised defensive display against the City team who were always going to swarm all over them. But without a doubt, the red card did change it. I mean, I've seen Arsenal time and again make it happen in games where they haven't necessarily started particularly well or played particularly well for a period of time. And I go back to the win at Tottenham for a pretty recent example of that, where Tottenham had the better of the opening 20 minutes, half hour. But Arsenal turned it on when it mattered and got there in the end. And I don't think it's anywhere near beyond the bounds of possibility that they would have done that on Saturday. But I think against an Ireola team, against a Brighton side as they had previously, certainly against City, it's very, very low odds of that happening when you've only got 10 players.
Yeah, and also, James, that Martinelli chance, I guess, Mikel Arteta did speak about it, could have evened things up at least, or at least made life easier for Arsenal if that went in.
Yeah, it's a big moment in the game. Compounded by the fact that Arsenal, concede off a well-worked set piece just a few moments later. Gabriel Martinelli came on as a substitute for Leandro Trossard. I think he'd be on the pitch 3 or 4 minutes when that opportunity came his way. Maybe I'm being too kind, but I wonder if that offers some degree of mitigation. He wasn't quite in the rhythm of the game, but it's a good save from Kepa. But I think Martinelli would see that as a chance he should take. And if Arsenal score there, with them being as defensively organised as they are, they showed that at the Etihad, as Phil mentioned, you'd say they'd have every chance of seeing that out for the win. And these are the fine margins. It is kind of absurd how much focus we're putting on these matches in October when the league will be decided in May. But that's kind of the standard that Manchester City have set. And Liverpool fans have been through this ringer before, where every missed chance, every drop point feels like it could be absolutely crucial come the end of the season. And Arsenal in that place right now. I suppose the one positive is that they've got a great opportunity next weekend to get back on the horse. If they beat Liverpool, suddenly it will all feel on again and send out a big statement. So there'll be tremendous focus on that at Arsenal at London Colney over the next few days.
Yeah, James, Mikel Arteta there mentioning the need to stop the red cards. Arsenal are on 3 for the season so far. Declan Rice and also Leandro Trossard previously. They were both given their second yellow cards for denying restarts. Declan Rice called them, quote unquote, and he said it after the match, silly mistakes. How can this be fixed for Arsenal, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's been very costly. I mean, and Arsenal's record now shows under Mikel Arteta, I think 18 red cards. comfortably the most of any team in the Premier League across that period. They've taken 16 points from a possible 51 in those games in which they've received red cards, which shows you quite how punishing it can be. I do think there has to be some mitigation here, which is that Arsenal's disciplinary record has actually improved over the last couple of years. They've been substantially better. I think the season before last, they didn't have a single red card. Last season, just 2. And it seemed like they'd really turned the corner on that front. This season, obviously, it's been a torrid start in terms of receiving red cards, and a very costly one. I think when you look at the incidents individually, it's not as if Arsenal are a team who are playing in an aggressively violent manner. It's not as if there's bad challenges flying in all over the place. You've got 2 instances where they've been punished for kicking the ball away. I think, quite harshly, I would suggest, and a rule that doesn't appear to be being enforced emphatically across the rest of the Premier League. We're seeing lots of examples of players getting away with very similar offences. So they'll feel a little bit aggrieved about that. And then the Saliba one, as it all comes down to a very unusual decision from Leandro Trossard to play a first-time pass back towards his own centre-half and miscuing it. And I think Saliba panics a little bit in that moment. Ordinarily, I think he'd back himself to win that race, or at least do enough to put Evanilson off. As it is, he reaches out, pulls the guy back, and a red card based on a subjective decision after a VAR review is given. So is there much Arsenal can do about those particular offences? I'm not so sure, really. I mean, if Arsenal get another booking this season for kicking the ball away or delaying a restart, they've got no one to blame but themselves. They've been really warned by this point in time. But
that's probably it, though, isn't it, James? If you were Arteta at the moment, you would, and without getting into all the dark arts stuff, which has been a bit over the top, I think, in relation to the way it's been applied to Arsenal, that debate. But you would think that this week Arteta would be saying to them at various junctures, look, this is a good point at which we need to be quite squeaky clean with what we're doing. We need to, things like Trossard kicking the ball away, Rice kicking the ball away, I think they're very different to the Saliba red card, where you've got to make a decision in split moment. And, perhaps Saliba's thinking, I'll get away with this if I do it. But I think more likely than not, he's just reacted impulsively, and there's not a lot you can do about that. But you would assume that if Arteta has a problem with this now, he would be saying to them, look, just don't put yourselves in harm's way, at least for a little period of time, just to kind of calm this record down, because it is definitely hurting them.
I think so, yeah, and change that perception. And he'll be frustrated because they worked really hard to change that perception, and there had been a significant improvement in disciplinary record. So they need to ride this period out, because I'm certainly not in the business of implying any sort of conscious bias on the part of any officials. But I think once you become characterised as a team who pick up red cards and that kind of narrative emerges, I do think that can impact some of the officiating around you. I've seen that with individual players where, they gain a reputation as a dirty player or a clumsy player. And I think yellow cards can come out a little bit quicker in those instances. So Arsenal have to be really careful here. And just crucially, they just cannot afford to play more minutes like this. It's, Arteta said after the Bournemouth game, it's almost impossible to analyse these games because, the plan gets thrown out as soon as you go down to 10 men. And against an opponent of the quality of Liverpool, for example, who they've got next weekend, they'll suffer. And that's another element to this that's not been discussed. Arsenal are losing these players mid-game, going down to 10 men, but they're also serving suspensions. They were without Declan Rice for the North London derby. They're going to be without William Saliba for the visit of Liverpool. That is incredibly costly. So the effects of these incidents extends beyond the 90 minutes. And across the course of a season, the price is huge.
This brings us actually quite nicely into the title race, James. We talk about small details, especially from an Arsenal perspective, and Phil alluding that, Liverpool haven't really felt that much pressure so far. And these are the kind of tiny details Arsenal really need to grind out if they are going to be considered a title hopes again this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it should be lost in our analysis that Arsenal have had a tough start to the season with some really big games. We spoke about the North London derby. We've spoken about the Etihad. They also went to Villa Park and got a very good result.
Their away record is brilliant through 2024. I mean, there's no denying.
Haven't lost yet, in the calendar year.
Yeah, so they've been really, they would have been very satisfied, I think, at the international break with where they were. I think they would have been very content with their points tally. Obviously, this result in particular is a bit of an outlier and a problem. I think it's the timing of it that's so interesting. Just before this Liverpool game, which I think was already taking on a big match feel. I think it would have had that anyway, but given the way Slot started at Liverpool, given their result over Chelsea, given the momentum they've got, for Arsenal to stutter now, it is untimely because, suddenly at this stage in the season, I think if Liverpool win at the Emirates, I think they'd be 7 points in front.
Yeah.
That's not a small gap. That's one that would require some work and some change to overhaul. Manchester City also have a pretty favourable fixture in the weekend. They play Southampton. I mean, stranger things have happened, but you would very strongly fancy Manchester City in that game. That could take them, if Arsenal were to lose the game, 6 points ahead of Arsenal. They would just be a little bit adrift all of a sudden. And it would feel cruel and dramatic and quick, but that is kind of the nature of these title races. So, while Mikel Arteta won't want to look past Shakhtar Donetsk, and the next game is always the most important for him, it is a pretty weighty fixture next weekend, and I think Arsenal, will be in good shape and able to take the game to Liverpool and make a really good fist of it, but without captain Martin Odegaard, now without William Saliba, with a doubt potentially over the fitness of Bukayo Saka, and off the back of a defeat at Bournemouth, they're not coming into it in the shape that they would hope.
Yeah, and I guess City also the added extra to this, Phil. Look, every season we talk about their mentality as a team, and yet again, could this be another defining factor? City have been here, done that. Even that result against Wolves, John Stones last minute once again pops up and wins it for them. I mean, they've just got this something, haven't they?
It is relevant. It definitely is relevant, and it's relevant because it's made the difference in both of the last two seasons up against Arsenal in positions where it looked like it was Arsenal's title to lose, but City have this habit of winning and winning and winning when they really need to do it. And James was saying there about kind of untimely point for this to happen. I think the point in the Premier League these days is that there is absolutely no good time to lose a game. The standards are so high for those teams who are going for the title that you can't afford to be far off perfection, which means that it must leave players and coaches very highly strung, knowing that the margins for error are so tiny. That any time, which is why after Tottenham, before Tottenham and the City game for Arsenal, people were talking about, could this gap open up again? We're discussing the gap that could be there if they lose to Liverpool, and it's very real, and it's it's very meaningful. 7 points is a huge step to overcome if you find yourself that far back at any point. So I think that the City factor is there because that they will be there at the end of the season. They're not going to drop off to any significant degree. But I think even City understand that Arsenal have now got themselves into that groove as well, and Liverpool have started well, because the celebrations of that goal at Wolves yesterday, Stones scoring later on, particularly because it required VAR to award it, that tells you how critical even those 2 points are in Guardiola's head. Because again, he knows that this could come down to a couple of points at the end of the season.
Yeah, and it's a quick one to you both, actually, before we wrap up. Manchester City have won the Premier League in each of the last 4 seasons, and they've never had more than 2 red cards in any of those campaigns. And I'm just thinking about what you just said about perfection, Phil. Last time they had more than 2 red cards was the 2019-2020 season when Liverpool won the title. So does a title-winning side need good discipline, James?
I think so. And I think, if I think about, it's easy to write off those sendings off that Arsenal got for delaying restarts as kind of, quite random events, or just the consequence of a new directive in terms of PGMOL officiating. But I remember sitting with Mikel Arteta in the summer. A few of us were out in America, and we had a conversation about where Arsenal can improve, how they can make up the difference with Manchester City. And actually, restarts were something that were a real focus that he talked about. What Arsenal can do when the ball goes out of play. And obviously there's a proactive element to that in terms of when it's their free kick. Watch Arsenal this season. The speed at which they take free kicks is frightening. And they've already scored from a couple of situations like that, I believe, or at least created very good opportunities. But also delaying restarts was presumably part of those discussions as well. And I think actually maybe what Arsenal have to do is they look to exploit every possible margin, every possible efficiency, is tread that line. Tread that line where they are able to buy themselves a second or 2 seconds, whatever it might take, to reorganise the team, to get the back four in shape, in line, without incurring the wrath of the referee. I don't expect Arsenal to be perfect. I don't expect them to be holy. And I think if you want to win a Premier League, Manchester City have shown that at times you have to be cynical. But maybe there is a skill in being cynical and getting away with it. And maybe that's a step in Arsenal's evolution and development that they are still making.
Yeah. What do you think, Phil?
I think the difficulty is that you never quite know where the line is with being cynical, do you? And sometimes I wonder if a lot of it just comes down to chance, that you'll go through periods where you are cynical and you do try and twist or bend the rules and you get lucky with it. There used to be a lot of discussion around City and tactical fouls in the midfield, going back a couple of years. But then there are periods where it doesn't happen. And I think the periods in which you do find that it's to your cost, that's when the penny has to drop. And as I was saying earlier, it would surprise me a lot if Arteta wasn't spending part of this week saying to the players, look, the price of this has actually been pretty high so far. In all of the games where we've had players sent off, we've dropped points. And to some degree in unlucky fashion, particularly away at City, but not so on Saturday. And the more you do it, the more it's going to cost you, and the higher the price is going to be. So I think that has to happen. I think you do need good discipline to win the title. But I don't think what's happened at the weekend makes Arsenal any less of a title contender than they were before. I still look at them as a really good, strong side. They'll have Odegaard and Saka coming back at some point. When I've seen them play well this season, I've been impressed, and they've looked like an Arteta team. I'd go as far as to say that they've just had a bad weekend, but I think the problem with the Premier League as it is now is that you just cannot afford too many of those.
Okay, Shakhtar next, and then the big one with Liverpool on Sunday for Arsenal. Gents, thank you so much for your time, James and Phil, and also thank you guys all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.